delighted to welcome Nitya. Nitya, yes, I can see you in the guest list. Thank you for coming here on time. And Nitya Jacob, he's a policy analyst and author. And Nitya, in your profile, if I'm not updated and adding anything, please feel free to do so. And I know Nitya from so many years and the kind of work that he has been doing and we have been following. He has been writing books. He has been also associated with a Forum India chapter where he has been sharing the knowledge and learning from different organization and development sector. But Nitya has been a person who is there at the policy level, also has been looking at projects happening on ground. So he can give us kind of a bird eye view. And welcome Nitya, and he's going to talk about water security issues in rural areas and challenges and solution. In fact, Nitya, there was yesterday a question about water poverty versus water security, and I think you are the one, you can take questions, and in case once you finish your presentation and there are questions, we can linger on for some time, because there is I'm now they're used to of my encroaching their breaks. So because it's very important to have these question answer sessions. So Nitya, over to you. You are going to share your presentation and going to run that also. Welcome. So Nitya, yeah, as I told you, the students, you were there in the last year process also, and students are from master level graduates in environment science, environmental management, MTech, and PhD scholars working on agriculture and range of issues. So here you are. I'm just glad to hand over the forum to you.
Okay, great. So good to be back after a year, and thanks, Alka. It's a pleasure to speak to young people who are interested in doing work on water and learning more about the various issues, and speaking to even the government and being fairly frank in their questions. It was very nice to hear the extremely wide range of very frank questions that you had for the NMCG director. So I'm going to speak a little bit on what you had asked me, Alka, on rural water supply. But then I'll switch to a topic that is very close to my heart, which is also linked to rural water supply. And one of the, I think it was Ujjwal, who asked about traditional, what happened to water management in the past and where did we go wrong. So the second half of the presentation actually looks at how Indians have traditionally managed water, the traditional water wisdom that this country has accumulated over thousands of years. So it's kind of divided into two sections. Both are related, and we can take questions at the end, maybe one by one. So I'll just share my screen, and let's hope this works.
Yeah, Nitya, we can see this.
Okay, great. I'm just trying to get back to the meeting screen. All right. So it's called The Big Thirst, and it looks at rural water supply. As you know, the main water program for this country to provide drinking water in rural areas in most of the villages is run by the government. There have been various versions of the program over the last 25 years. The last version was the National Rural Drinking Water Program, which has now been morphed into what they call the Jal Jeevan Mission. And the focus of the program has changed from merely providing water to providing drinking water from pipes, so piped water supply. And that has been a major shift in the last 3-4 years. The slide is not working. Sorry, just give me a minute. slides are not changing, so I'll just go back to the non-slideshow mode and try and make this a little larger. Can everybody see this? Is it visible enough?
I think so. Can you raise hands, colleagues?
Yes, so it's visible.
All right, fine. So, Jal Jeevan Mission is the national program, and in spite of the last 25-30 years of providing drinking water, in rural areas, about 6% of people still don't have access to quality and adequate water. Now, the table at the bottom gives a kind of per capita availability of water from 1950 to 2051, so over a 100 years period. And you can see that about now, 2025, or if you look at 2021 even, the per capita water availability is roughly about 1,300 cubic meters per person per year, which is actually almost at the water scarcity level. And this includes all the water that is available to a person in the form of drinking water, bathing water, water which comes in the form of food, and the clothes you buy, the furniture you have. All that water is encapsulated in this 1341 cubic meters per capita availability. Now, this slide is a quick overview of rural water supply through tap connections. The states where the coverage is very low are of course in the northern belt. Some of them, the UP, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bengal, and in the northeast. But in the south, you can see that there is moderate coverage, and in the west, there is slightly better coverage. Of course, Punjab, Haryana, and Uttarakhand, Himachal have better coverage levels. But this is only for tap water, pipe water supply. If you look at overall water supply, the situation is far more uniform across the country. Jal Jeevan Mission, the vision is that every rural household should have drinking water in adequate quantity and of the prescribed quantity. That is the BIS norms on drinking water supply on a long-term and affordable basis. And then it's important to note that they're talking about improvement in living standards of rural communities. Now, this translates into better health and better and higher incomes. And we can discuss that later, but broadly, in both Swachh Bharat Mission and Jal Jeevan Mission, they've talked about improvements in the quality of life. So like I said earlier, the focus of Jal Jeevan Mission is to make sure that every household has a functional household tap connection, especially in quality affected areas where the groundwater or surface water has either too much bacteria or there are other contaminants like fluoride and arsenic and salinity. Drought affected areas as well. All schools and Anganwadi centers and health centers also need to have tap connections. The functionality is going to be monitored. The ownership of this and the maintenance is actually shifted to the community through to be implemented through panchayats. The human resources so that the local maintenance can be done by the panchayats, those are going to be developed. So basically plumbers and electricians should be available locally, and there will be awareness on various aspects and the significance of safe drinking water. So under this, the mission envisages a bunch of activities, development of pipe water infrastructure, reliable drinking water sources. Now, the sources from where the water comes. It could be a tube well, it could be a pond, it could be a river, it could be. They are sustainable in the long term. Now, in some cases, the main water supply agency, like the Public Health Engineering Department, or in UP, it's the UP Jal Nigam, they would provide bulk water to a certain central point, and then within the village, the village committee, which is a subcommittee of the panchayat, would be responsible for making and maintaining the pipe water system in the village and also collecting the tariffs. Now, they are envisaging a supply level of 55 liters per capita per day, which is much more than the existing norm of 40 LPCD. If there's pipe water, it has been seen that there's more wastewater generated. So the Jal Jeevan Mission also makes provisions for grey water management, that is wastewater management. And of course, there is a whole bunch of other support activities, such as community awareness, training, water quality laboratories, testing and surveillance, and research and development. Now, the ground reality is a little different. Tap water connections are available in about 40% households. Over the last decade, it's gone from about 11% to 40% now. So there has been an increase. There is no data on how functional these connections are and what the water quality is like, because that is monitored separately and that data is not readily available. More than 80% of drinking water comes from the ground. And this is important because in spite of all attempts at improving surface water availability, groundwater remains the most important source of water for drinking as well as water for agriculture and other sources. And we'll come back to groundwater in a little while. Now, the effect of this enormous use of groundwater has been that 60% of the groundwater blocks in India have been either are being overused or are critical. And this is from the Central Groundwater Board. There is also a lot of mismanagement and corruption in the planning and execution of water projects, especially large water projects, and quality is not well monitored. The panchayats have been asked to manage the operations and maintenance as well as look after quality, but they are not well equipped to do so, and they get some amount of training, but they require far more training. And the data that is available for water resource planning is either outdated or is not very accurate. So the government looks at habitations as being fully covered, which means all households have a functional water connection within a certain distance or a tap water connection all the year. And then it goes down in groups of 25%. So 100%, 75 to 100%, 50 to 75%, and like that. So fully and partially covered right there. And then quality affected as well. So while 94% seem to be kind of covered, it's only a small percentage of those, 66% actually, which have enough water, that 40 liters per capita per day through the year of good quality water. So the basis of planning is coverage, which means that there has to be a functional water point which provides that much of water for the user households, not water security. We'll come to water security versus I think Alka had asked a question about this. We can come back to it in a little while. Water insecurity becomes worse in summer across the country, actually, not just in coastal areas, because there is a long drought from March to about June when the monsoons start. In coastal areas, there is a salinity ingress from the seas because there's excessive withdrawal of groundwater for irrigation, as well as in hilly terrains because of excessive mining and industrialization, and also the hospitality industry. There's a huge growth of tourism across the country, and that has also been partly responsible for water crisis in hills. Drinking water, especially groundwater, well, both ground and surface water are severely contaminated, both by human factors, so by untreated excreta, industrial pollutants, and things like that, as well as naturally occurring pollutants like fluoride and arsenic and salinity and hardness. Water collected from sources such as hand pumps, wells, even piped water supply may be safe at the source. So the hand pump may have been tested and gives you safe water, but the biggest point of contamination is actually at the household level. So where water is stored and used in households, that is where the most contamination takes place because of unsafe practices. Pipe water systems are expensive to maintain because of the nature. Pipes break, motors burn out, and there are more moving parts in a pipe water system. Community contributions are not very robust, and therefore there is a dependence on the government or a private contractor to fix the system, and that does not happen very quickly. So there is always a downtime in not just in pipe water but also in hand pumps. This chart essentially summarizes what we just went over a little while ago. So this is sort of like a quick grid of different organizations and agencies that are working on drinking water. There is the government, District Rural Development Agency, District Water and Sanitation Missions, which work at the district level to make sure that water security plans are made and financed through various sources of money. There are technical agencies such as WaterAid, Water for People, Water.org, UNICEF, and all of them. They and their partners, they are experts in water resource management. There are multilateral agencies, international NGOs, etc., working on water-related issues who work actually close to the ground. So they can actually provide technical inputs, training inputs, and other such support to panchayats to make sure that the panchayats are able to discharge their functions. We often ignore the power of the media in these kind of developments, especially in water supply. But the media can be a very useful tool to inform people about water security plans, how to pay tariffs, fix tariffs, and things like that, and also to be a bridge between the people and the government. And then academic institutions, especially not just the IITs, but the engineering colleges that are run below the IITs, they are extremely underused in the country in their capacity to conduct large-scale research and to suggest, to work with NGOs or even the government on generating evidence of what is working and what is not working, as well as coming up with new technologies. Now, coming back to groundwater. So, I said about 80% of all our drinking water needs, agriculture needs, and all of that comes from groundwater. So, about 1 billion of us use groundwater every day for something or the other. 700 million in rural India. 420 million use groundwater in agriculture for at least one season, maybe the dry season. The Kharif season, of course, people use rainwater. But our sampling, this was from an organization I was working with, 85% of all groundwater tested has biological contamination, which means that it is contaminated by fecal matter or untreated sewage. And that is a matter of enormous concern because people tend to think groundwater is safe and they drink it without further treatment. If it has got bacterial contamination, then people can fall sick with diarrhea or cholera or jaundice or those kind of diseases. Now, this is from the Central Groundwater Board, which is a little old, but the trends have remained more or less the same. You can see that in the pre-monsoon season, groundwater levels are pretty low right across the country, from 5 meters down to all the way down to 40 meters below ground level. There are very few areas where the groundwater levels are high, above 5 meters. In some coastal areas and in the Indo-Gangetic Plain in UP and in northern UP and in northern Bihar. Otherwise, the rest of the country, you see that groundwater levels are very, very low before the monsoons. After the monsoons, of course, the situation improves, except in the northwest, where there is very little change. If you see this map and this map, most of the rest of the country sees a rise in water table after the monsoon has started. But then once the monsoon is over, again the groundwater levels start to decrease, and very quickly. So right from August, where a large part of the country has shallow water tables and the situation is improved, to November, again because of the enormous withdrawal of groundwater for all kinds of purposes, the level starts to fall again. And then back to January, from January again, you're back to the same groundwater emergency situation. So looking at it in another way, 54% of India's groundwater in 54% of the country is decreasing. And this has been going on for several decades, which is why if you are living in a rural area, you will hear that wells have to be deepened, or a new well has to be bored, or even in cities, you will see that new wells have to be bored or deepened or things like that every few years, and that is an incredibly expensive and unsustainable option to get into groundwater. This is overall water use, and you see that irrigation is by far the single largest user of water. And it's not just groundwater, it's also surface water, it's rainwater, and this is water from all sources. Domestic use, which we make such a big deal about, Jal Jeevan Mission and the urban water supply, is actually a tiny percentage. Energy, industry, and others also use very, very small percentages. So the big elephant in the room where it comes to water use is irrigation. And that ties into water security in rural areas. Essentially, 30 million wells. This is also like an informal assessment of the number of wells. There's actually no pan-India census of wells which captures everything, because most of the wells are in the private sector. Wells drilled by various government agencies have been recorded, but again, there's no record of whether they're actually functional. So 30 million is a ballpark figure. 243 billion cubic meters is the annual groundwater availability. And then there are maybe 2-3 million springs across the country, which are essentially natural sources of water. They feed wells, they feed dug wells like the figure on the left, or you can access the spring directly from the surface. And people use spring water for drinking in many parts of the country. It's unprotected and it's usually contaminated. Sometimes people have the money or the resources to boil that water, but other times it's simply just filter the water and drink it. Looking at where a typical village would use water, the big irrigated agriculture in the wet season, the Rabi season, uses 2/3 of the water, followed by irrigated agriculture in Rabi is the dry season. Irrigated agriculture in summer is more than a quarter, Rain-fed agriculture, Kharif, is another 7% almost. So if you look at irrigation in a village, it's 2/3, 66, 80, about 86% of water, almost 90% of the water in a village goes for farming. Drinking water is a tiny percent, 0.02% of the total water used in a village. Other domestic water may be less than 1%, and animals again less than 1%. So all of that is barely any amount of, there's a tiny amount of water that's used there. Now the quantity is actually a little misleading, because for irrigation you don't need good quality water. You can use practically any water for irrigation if it doesn't have any harmful industrial effluents in it. But for domestic use, drinking use, and even for animals, you need water that has a certain quality. It should not have any harmful chemicals. It should not have any harmful industrial effluents. And ideally, even water for animals should not have human excreta mixed in it. So that has implications for rural water supply. And it's for those top three things that the entire Jal Jeevan Mission is being implemented. This is just a graphic. Wells by millions of farmers. However, wells are multiple water use sources, because the same source is used for farming, it's used for domestic use, it's used for animals, and any other use of water that is there in a village. It all comes out of one source. Poor people usually have common sources of water. In rural areas, this translates to common hand pumps or common stand posts, which are linked to a pipeline network, or springs like this, this is actually a picture from Nepal, but these are public springs. The rich, of course, can afford individual household connections, or they have their own hand pump within their compound, so they don't have to go out of their compound for accessing water. I guess if you live in any part of the country, you will come across scenes like this, where the water mains have a spaghetti of water supply pipes running out of them, and then these go to individual households. Now you can see that a system like this with rusting pipes, twisted pipes, and all of that would be a nightmare to maintain. If one pipe is leaking, you have to move all the other pipes out of the way to try and fix it. And usually these systems are very poorly made, and one truck or tractor going over them will damage multiple pipes. So they're extremely prone to faults. But this is in practice how water supply happens in rural areas as well as in urban areas. So we already looked at groundwater dependence, so I won't spend time on this. So basically, what I was trying to establish is that both in rural areas as well as in urban areas, if you see this slide again, the last point is that urban areas, almost 50% of the total use comes from groundwater. Cities are a little better because they're so huge that simply groundwater cannot supply all their needs. So they do have canals, dams, and various other surface water sources. Delhi gets about 70% of its water from various dams and rivers. The same thing in Bombay and Calcutta, and well, even in Chennai. Bangalore is a little different, but they have now got a major scheme to supply water from the Kaveri River. So they're also getting a large percentage of their water from surface water sources. In spite of that, urban cities still use a large percentage of get a large percentage of their water from the ground. So traditionally, it was different. People used to manage their water locally, and there were local water systems which actually suited the geography and the climate and were made from local material. They're all low technology. So there are no pipelines there are no pumps, there's no high technology about making a big dam or things like that. But the beauty of these solutions were that they were local and they were lasting. They lasted for hundreds of years. We'll take a quick look at them. And they were all very critical to water security in that area. So people who live in and around Delhi, maybe you've seen Badkal Lake, and there are quite a few other lakes around there. These were made by the Rajput rulers about 1,000 odd years ago to provide water to villages in and around those areas. Of course, they become dry because the catchments have been either encroached or mined in. So I don't think there's much water left in any of these lakes. This is a step well in Rajasthan near Dausa called Chandki Bauli. It taps underground springs, and it used to be a place for local people to congregate and spend evenings. The water at the bottom would keep the entire place very nice and cool, and it was a great place for socials. You can see the galleries on the side where people would sit and relax every evening. Across the country, in fact, across North India, especially in Rajasthan, UP, and I think in MP also, there are lots of these step wells which tap into shallow aquifers. This is one in near Karoli in Rajasthan, which taps into a spring, and it's been used for centuries for watering plants as well as for watering crops as well as animals. And you can see a few goats walking around. When they get thirsty in the middle of the day, they go down and drink water. So water conservation has been a very sacred duty also in this country. Fatehpur Sikri, if you've been there, below the Dargah is an enormous water reservoir, and all the rainwater that fell in the area around the Dargah was actually collected and used for drinking and various other purposes for the fort for many months. But it's a different matter that eventually there was a drought and the fort was abandoned. Uttarakhand, there are hundreds and hundreds of springs in the hills. They are channeled into small square structures like this one called dharas, and then this is from where people actually used to take their drinking water directly from the spout. And from the pond on the right side of the picture, you can actually take water for other purposes. But if you want it for drinking, you would collect it from the spouts which are on the left. So there was a method in this whole system, and the springs were protected. No human habitation and no animals were allowed around the source of the springs, and as they flowed into the dhara, there was a kind of a social compact for that. If you go to Rajasthan, you'll find these saucer-shaped rainwater harvesting systems called tankas. They collect rainwater, and under the dome in the center, there is a well, and the water collects there and can be used for the whole year. This is only used for drinking, not for any other purpose. Southern state of Tamil Nadu, it has a system of protected ponds called aries, which are surrounded by barbed wire so animals cannot get in. Humans, especially women, there is a well there, so you get some kind of filtered water in the well. This is only rainwater, so it's actually free from contaminants like bacteria and other things which would come with surface water, and it's protected from the inflow of surface water by high walls all around it. UP, again, I think there are quite a few from UP. There are lots of talabs, and there's been a big movement for their revival to make sure that there is enough water for direct human use as well as to recharge the groundwater. And a lot of talabs in UP have a well in one corner from where you can actually draw drinking water. Same structure in Rajasthan, which is actually lined so that the rainwater which comes in and fills this does not seep into the ground. And it's available in that pond in the middle. During the rains, it fills right up to the stairs, but it's available for human use. Similar talab for in the Amer fort in Rajasthan. So it was multiple structures with the same name. In Bundelkhand, farmers traditionally used to dig out a corner of their field and use it for storing rainwater. So once the monsoons would end and they needed more water, they could use this for additional irrigation, and it also helped to recharge the groundwater. And that groundwater would be available in the dry season in their wells for further irrigation or for drinking or for any other purpose. This is also a big pond in the Bundelkhand region. Some of these were made 1,000–1,500 years ago by the Chandela Rajputs, the rulers at that time. And many of them are still around today. They play a huge role in groundwater recharge, as well as in they have a big ecological function in keeping the entire area moist and sustaining plants and wildlife. Goa also, a wet place like Goa also has a very rich system of groundwater management. In fact, across these wet regions of India, people don't so much store as manage water. They channel water from ponds located at heights for different types of cultivation. So here, this one is for betel nut or for palm. And the same thing on the other side of the country in Meghalaya, where they use bamboo to channel spring water and use it for betel nut cultivation. Water, I think someone noted that the Ganga is a holy river, but it's not just the Ganga. Practically all the rivers and ponds and lakes in this country are treated as holy. And if you look carefully, you will find a small shrine or a big temple on the banks of practically all lakes and along rivers, of course. But water is very sacred to all the religions in this country. So this one you just saw the Dargah. This is Varanasi. This is a church in Kerala. And of course, it was an integral part of architecture as well. So the forts, the builders of forts, Red Fort, Amer Fort, all these forts used water to keep their stone structures cool during the summer. The palace, which has built on a pond, and it has a very intricate system of fountains which are used during Holi. Apparently, they are multicolored fountains. Fatehpur Sikri, this stage where Tansen used to sing, is surrounded by water to keep him cool. So that's in a nutshell the kind of traditional water wisdom that we've had in this country over the last few thousand years actually. And the link to rural water supply is very crucial. A lot of these systems are still there. They can be revived and used for much less cost than putting in a new pipe water network or a new water system. And they're cheap to do so. They can be maintained by the local community. They're all low technology and they're accessible to the public, which is very important because water is ultimately a community resource and therefore it should be owned and managed by the community. The government could provide technical inputs and help communities to do so, but the final responsibility for managing the resources is with the community because they are the owners. Okay, I'll stop there and stop sharing my screen as well. And if you have questions, happy to take them. I'll turn my camera on.
With photos, very beautiful documentation of traditional water. Very nice one. And I wish I could be there, I could be here. Like that was beautiful, I think. The kind of traditional water system existing, and as well as whatever preservation to date has happened. I've seen Katra in Rajasthan, in Bikaner district. So I have visited Fluoride job for a project assessment, in fact. At that time, a lot of structures were seen. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So great, I think. Thank you. let's do the discussions. I think those are very important things. Urja, I think, has raised.
First of all, so thank you for such a great presentation. So actually, in your slide, I saw that UP and Rajasthan, two of the most populous states, don't have enough tap water for such a large populations. So, how do you see it coming in the years ahead? Don't you think it's going to be a major challenge?
I think it will be a greater challenge. See, the problem with any rural water supply system over the last, I think, 40, 45 years, we've put in millions of hand pumps and tube wells and all of that. But there have been studies on their functionality and quality, and they found that almost half of them are either defunct or they have serious quality issues at any time. And now, this pipe water scheme system is also going to use the same water sources. So it will suffer from the same problems of functionality and quality that hand pumps have. Unless they look at completely different sources. Rajasthan does not have enough surface water sources to supply all these pipe water schemes. UP has, but a lot of them are contaminated because the population density is so high, and the sanitation situation in UP. I think, if you walk in rural UP for 5 kilometers, you're going to find piles and piles of excreta and cow dung and all of that. All that goes into surface water sources and groundwater sources. So without expensive treatment, it's going to be impossible to make sure that everybody has safe drinking water. And it's not just, the problem is that you're not just trying to provide pipes to provide water, you're trying to provide safe water. So people can drink that water and not fall sick. Otherwise, there's no point in having all this water being supplied and people are drinking it and falling sick. They're doing that anyway. So why put in so much money to do more of the same? So it's going to be a challenge unless things are done differently.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, Nitya?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, sir. So I'd like to ask you that now that the Jal Jeevan mission is on, I think the main way to see that it's implemented properly is to look at whether it's being maintained properly. And I think maintenance in India is a very big issue. So how do we ensure that maintenance is prioritized? Also, I'd like to know that see, in India, only Tamil Nadu is the state which has actually made rainwater harvesting compulsory. Why is it not made compulsory all over India yet, given that we are a country facing, groundwater issues? So that is my question.
You're in Kharagpur.
Yes, sir.
Are you from Tamil Nadu?
My parents belong to Tamil Nadu, but I've never stayed there. I've been born, brought up in Bengal, yeah.
Well, a few years, no, not a few years, a few decades ago, Chennai had a very, very severe water crisis. And basically, it had no water in summer. And the few tankers that supplied water, also, they were ridiculously expensive. I'm talking about the 1970s and 1980s. At that time, I think the bureaucrats there, they had a few enlightened bureaucrats. One of them just decided, okay, enough is enough. Now we need to take the bull by its horns. And then she made rainwater harvesting compulsory. I think this was when Jayalalitha had become CM for the first time. And there was a secretary, I don't know whether she was secretary or some other, a little lower down, called Shantashila Nayar. She basically said that, look, all houses starting with Chennai and then going across the state will have to install a rainwater harvesting system. And she cracked the whip and it got done. Because there was an emergency. Therefore, it happened. And I think for the want of a better word, the Madrasis saw that it was absolutely essential and it was central to their survival. Now, you come to Delhi. We have tried to institutionalize rainwater harvesting multiple times over the last 30 odd years. In fact, there are building bylaws that say that if your house occupies more than a certain plot area, you must have a rainwater harvesting system. But everybody will put in some silly little tank or something and call it a rainwater harvesting system just for the sake of getting their building permits passed. Actually, it's not done, and people aren't serious because Delhi वालों को पानी मिल जाएगा, regardless of the rest of the country. The rest of India can die of thirst, but Delhi will always get water. And that's unfortunately the case in all other cities. When there is an emergency, the government will provide tankers, will run trains, will do all kinds of other stopgap arrangements instead of making sure that there's a simple thing like rainwater harvesting. There is rainwater harvesting is also compulsory in Kerala, strangely enough. About 12-13 years ago, there was one small experiment in one district in Trichur to use rooftop rainwater harvesting to recharge wells. And that worked so well that now it has become a state government program. And it's done by households. So they are provided some amount of subsidy, they provided some amount of technical drawings and things like that. And then the panchayats make sure that houses put in their rainwater harvesting systems which are linked to wells, because wells are still the primary source of drinking water there. So even in Kerala, they're doing it. And it's a very low cost thing. Say a maximum of 10,000 rupees per household ensures water security around the year. So it's not a lot of money. It's not high technology. It's a few pipes and a sand filtration system, and that's it. And that kind of system actually you can have across the country. But the tendency of people has been कि सरकार देगी. सरकार को देने के लिए एक ही वो रास्ता दिखता है कि पाइप्स लगा देंगे. Pipes में पानी कहाँ से आएगा? Nobody seems to know, and they keep making more dams and or digging deeper wells and all that. But the more high technology you go, and the more distant, the greater the distance between the user and the source of water, the more the wastage and the costs. So it actually makes sense, what you're saying about rainwater harvesting, that makes more sense than using more and more technology to increase costs and distances and things like that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Nepal?
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Sir, you have mentioned about groundwater contamination in your PPT. I want to ask about specifically fluoride-related contamination. Nalgonda technique is there. My grandparents are from village only. I have visited other 3-4 villages also there. I have not seen single treatment facility are there. And 10 years back, my grandfather also using the natural fertilizer, the organic by making of cow dungs. Organic for last 10 years, they are switched to the NPK fertilizer, which are degrading the groundwater. So government knows about this. So why haven't they are addressing it? That groundwater contamination is increased in last 10 to 15 years, at least in my area. I'm from Surat.
So yeah, fluoride is a problem in many parts of the country. I don't know about Surat, but there are some parts of Gujarat where it is a problem. Rajasthan and Deccan, large parts have fluoride contamination. There are simple ways to remove fluoride from water. You can have a fluoride filter in your house, and you can drink fluoride-free water, even if you get it from a hand pump or a pipe water system, which is otherwise which has high levels of fluoride. About fertilizer, the issue is that fertilizer runoff, once it gets into groundwater, it's impossible to remove it unless you have very expensive treatment kind of options. You have to extract the empty the aquifer, which is also almost impossible, and then treat the groundwater and put it back. And I don't think anybody has tried that kind of thing. The overuse of fertilizers, unfortunately, is linked to the political economy of agriculture, the whole green revolution agenda. And it's in the interest of politicians and the corporate sector both to encourage the use of NPK. And farmers also have been, they've been used to this for now the last 40 odd years that the green revolution has been going on. So it's become a way of life. And the other side of the argument is, how can you tell a farmer not to use NPK and earn less money, it becomes a kind of a moral argument. So you can't tell the farmer कि आप NPK लगा के NPK मत लगाओ, सिर्फ organic fertilizer लगाओ, आपका soil और crops अच्छे होंगे, लेकिन आपको पैसे कम मिलेंगे. Why would the farmer want to pay for someone, lose his income today for a benefit that might accrue in the future? So basically, I think the whole green revolution approach should have thought of this, but at that point, I think the priority was to make sure that the country had food. So it's a cost that we are paying now.
Yes, I think there's a lot of debate on that. That has been there. Yeah,
Yes.
I actually asked one question. If there's no more questions around, Nitya, you have asked, right, Nitya? Your hand is raised again.
Yeah, Nivya had asked.
Yeah. Okay. So I actually, Nitya, I was saying that in round of introduction that I had your profile, which was very, very brief. I don't think so had justified what exactly you have done. If you can share your recent this chapter, the Susanna chapter 9 that you're looking at, and plus all the previous work, some of the work that you have done, because that itself is a great inspiration for the participants.
So about Susanna specifically. Okay.
But plus in previous organizations or some work, but yeah, the latest one will definitely, because they were
Okay.
knowing what exactly the Susanna chapter also will be interesting.
So I coordinate the Susanna India chapter. Susanna stands for the Sustainable Sanitation Alliance, which is sort of like an international alliance of experts and organizations that are working for improved sanitation across the globe. But also it also looks at drinking water quality, it looks at hygiene and those kind of issues. And we've actually looked at quite a few critical issues in India, as well as the advantage is that we can get foreign experts to share their experiences from other countries, which is good. We actually managed to take a lot of the summary documents that we come out with as a result of these discussions. We take them to the ministry, the Jal Jeevan Ministry, as well as the Ministry of Urban Development. And that has provided inputs to the various programs like Swachh Bharat Mission and Jal Jeevan Mission as well. Earlier, when I was working at WaterAid as head of policy, that was where we actually did a lot of work on, using evidence from grassroots programs. And WaterAid works with worked at that point with about 50 NGOs across the country on drinking water and sanitation, as well as on bigger water security issues. So to learn from the work that all these organizations were doing, and then to be able to inform government policy and programs, but mostly in state government. So we focused a lot at the state level. Each state has its own very distinct challenges and needs, and the situation is very different. And also state governments are more open to listening to local organizations. So in many states, we had actually distilled these learnings into small policy briefs, and those were very, very useful in talks whenever the state teams met the local government officials. It was very useful to sit with them and discuss various issues which had come up, to the extent that officers even asked WaterAid to let them know how they could how the government could help streamline WaterAid's work. So it was a very symbiotic relationship between the state government and WaterAid, as well as other organizations. There was UNICEF, World Bank, and others. But WaterAid's advantage was that it's an NGO, so it's not bound by the various the agreements and processes that UNICEF or World Bank are, because ultimately those are intergovernment organizations. and they have to follow certain protocols. So we had the flexibility of working as a kind of what you might call a critical friend. We could provide critical inputs. We could be critical also of the government, but provided we gave them constructive criticism of how to improve their policies and programs. That was very interesting, I think. Alka, you're muted, I think.
No, I saw that. You're like, I'm just doing it quite opposite. I didn't realize sometime I mute myself. So in fact, Nitya, I don't know whether you were there at that time, but in 2016, along with UNICEF and MHRD Ministry, we have done a study on operation maintenance of wash facilities in schools. So it was a mapping. So we looked at water aid projects in Karnataka, then water for people in West Bengal, then government along with UNICEF in Rajasthan, and again UNICEF and UP government in Uttar Pradesh, and some other states also, and looked at the various facets of operation maintenance. So basically, UNICEF wanted to use their documentation and reports research to advocate for the money allocation for operation maintenance of the drinking water, group hand washing, and plus on the sanitation toilet facility for girls and boys. So that was a very, very program to look at. So your water and sanitation work at that time was in HD Kote district that I have visited. And I think a very good approach, I think we will take it up with the fellows later, was on the capacity building, because every organization was using a very different strategy for operation and maintenance. So WaterAid had capacity building at all level. That was the key thrust, and I think that worked very well. You were working with I think that organization, Vivekananda Youth Movement, something there.
Yes.
So like that, yeah, looking at different approaches, efficient collaborations, and on the monitoring and evaluation approaches was a very good combination of that study came out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more questions we have here? Otherwise, I think we're fine with it. Okay. Yeah, Nitya, I think this is great. So what we have done now is we have called Umesh Pandey and for his session now. We will, and after that, so then we have Niranjan Khatri, you heard about him, yeah? That ITC Hotels Hospitality, the kind of work that he has done. Then fellows after lunch break will do, they'll participate in a group exercise which was allocated to them yesterday. There are 5 groups now. Each group has a theme. So one of them has a Shark Tank pitch. That they have a proposal and they have raised 10 crore for that. It is majorly they have to work under the theme of Clean Ganga, seek 10 crore from angel investor crowdfunding as well as from CSR and government. So now they will present pitch into that in one of the group exercise. Second, one of the group will do water audit. And another group will also, as like a DIY of water audit they will do. And second, another group will do a water smart quiz with the participant. And group will look at a simulation exercise. It's about they're preparing a master plan for a tier 2 city. They have got all stakeholders and finalized the plan. And now is a final meeting under chairmanship of the CM of the state to finalize, to put a rubber stamp, and all stakeholders are called. Now, let's see what happens in that meeting. So that's exercise where the industrialists will be but all the stakeholders are there. So let's see. And then one group is compiling 2 case studies, and there they are sharing those 2 case studies as if like they have done those work. So on the ground. So this is what is happening post lunch.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you very much, Nitya. I think it's a lovely presentation, and we received your presentation by mail also. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Alka. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.